This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tanisha Batiste. Alongside me are Falcons analyst Jarvis Davis, Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman, and senior Falcons reporter Tori McElhaney. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And of course, our Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Locked On is just different. Down to the way we roll out our top 100, we'll discuss. And Free with his own personal Mount Rushmore Falcons. Does the party agree or disagree? We'll download on that. Also, one thing about the Falcons, they're going to do good things in the community. We'll talk about it. But first, it's T-minus 3 days to the big day. So the Falcons hit IBM Performance Field for the start of training camp on Thursday. Jarvis, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of this year's camp?
3 words. One on ones. Let's go. I can't wait. Give me Jalen Walker. Give me Jalen Walker. Give me James Pierce Jr.
Give me only Jalen Walker.
Braylon Trice. I want all of that. Give me all of it. I want all of it. Caleb McGarry, get your butt in there. I want to see what you do against this rookie. Like, I want you to put your hands on him, and I want James Pierce to say, hey, man, get your hands off of him and go and get to the quarterback. So, yeah, I can't wait. One-on-ones for me, T, hands down. I can't wait. I'm super excited. I was at a 12U 11-on-11 football game. They're in full pads, which is weird to me. It's July. Why are they in pads already? And I was out there, I was up there talking to the kids and everything. My homeboy, who head coach, he was looking at me crazy. I was like, hey, man, I'm sorry. I got a little excited, I was like, hey, man, you got to use your hands, bro. He was like, he gave me the middle school, like, hey, big man, why are you talking to me type looks. But I was like, it's okay, bro. My bad. I got a little too excited. But, yeah, I can't wait. One-on-ones, sign me up. Let's go, baby.
So, Aaron, it sounds like Jarvis is choosing violence. That is something that is exciting to him. So, but yeah, I do know the excitement because pre-show, of course, we were talking about some of the sports we played when we were growing up. And one of the things that I kind of ensconced myself in this summer was track culture. But at every track meet, once people figured out what I did for a living, of course, they wanted to talk Falcons. So the whole conversation at the final track meet of the season, which was this past Saturday, was about the Falcons training camp, the first 6 games, gauntlet of the season, preseason, who we're going to see, who we're not going to see. So, yeah, I think everybody's really kind of amped up about training camp and the one thing that they want to see. So from your perspective, was that one thing for you when you think about camp starting this week, kind of where does your mind go?
Well, when I think about training camp, the things that come to mind is that it's too dang hot. But this year, it's because of the rain, it's going to be maybe a little bit better this year. But like other than the Georgia heat that has caused so many players to retire in the past, the thing that I'm looking forward to this training camp is always just the rookies and the guys that we haven't seen play in a Falcons uniform, and what they look like in training camp. And so because of all the talk about, we're going to be intentional about getting these guys on the field, you didn't really get an opportunity to see last year's rookie class play all that much on the football field outside of Michael Penix for 3 games and J.D. Bertrand for a couple of games. What is Root going to be? What is Braylon Trice going to be? What is Brandon Dolis going to be? And then, of course, you have, all 5 of the rookies from this year's draft class. Got to give Jack Nelson some love as well because he always gets forgotten in that conversation. But the 4 guys on defense, what they're going to be, and the expectation that all 4 of these guys could be starting games for the Falcons come week 1, and sort of will they live up to those expectations based off of how they perform this summer in training camp, in the preseason. All those things are sort of the things that I'm looking most forward to this training camp.
Yeah, Tori, I tell you, there are so many little things that we're going to be looking for. And I think for me, I kind of was chuckling because I'm like Jarvis, like, bring on the one-on-ones. But I'm like, like, damn, it's going to be hot looking at them damn one-on-ones. But, I don't do heat very well, even being from Louisiana. But that's it, Tori, when you think of camp starting this week, the anticipation, the buildup over the last 5 weeks, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of camp?
Well, I think this year particularly, I'm excited that fans are going to be back.
Yeah.
Because last year they didn't have the opportunity to see training camp at all because of all the construction that was happening around Flowery
Yes.
Branch. So I'm actually really excited for the fans to be a part of it, because I do think that adds an element of fun to training camp that, to be honest, like, I was missing last year. It was almost like when we came back from COVID. We had those 2 training camps during COVID that fans weren't allowed to be at, and I remember the first one coming back, and, like, the fans were there, the families were there, and it felt, like, so different. It felt
Yeah.
way more fun. It felt like the environment was so much, more holistic, and so I think for that reason, like, I'm really excited that fans will be sitting on the hill again, and they'll be able to interact with players and get to see what this team is about. I also think that adds to an element of competition amongst the players.
Yeah.
I think that it's really easy to feed off of the energy of a
yes.
crowd and a fan base. And I do think when Michael Penix makes his first like deep ball throw down the left sideline to Darnell Mooney, it's going to be pretty electric. So I think like that part of it I'm excited about. I also just think like getting to the point of training camp where I feel like I can actually start answering questions. Like, I feel like all this has been over the course of this off season since, honestly, January, since the season ended. I feel like everything that I've done has been like, well, during training camp in the preseason, like, we'll have more an idea of X, Y, or Z. And now we're finally to that point to be able to get some answers to some questions. I don't think it's going to be something where it's like it happens immediately. I don't think the first week of training camp I'm going to be able to tell you what the heck is going to go on with Kirk Cousins. But I do think that once we get like deep into the preseason and into training camp, like getting to see who some starters are going to be, to Free's point about like who's going to emerge up like as these like 2 rookie classes, let's be real, because considering last year's class didn't really play all that much, I still consider them kind of rookies in my own mind. So I think like being able to answer some of those like big questions about where this team is going is going to be, that's priority number 1.
Yeah. And most of the conversation was the same this weekend about people who are very intrigued, maybe more so about the class of 2024, because they feel like, I think I've said it in other shows, I've given them an incomplete. And so many of the fans I spoke with said the same. So yeah, there's a little bit, as much anticipation as there is about 25. It's just the same as 24, if not higher. And of course, Tori, you just called out one of the things that I think I heard. It was like, press rewind, hit play, press rewind, hit play. Man, I can't wait to see Penix with a deep ball. As QB1, like officially QB1 from the start of training camp. People are so very excited to see that. And you can see it if you go to the Atlanta Falcons landing page for training camp. The second practice is actually already sold out. So, that kind of shows you that there is anticipation amongst the fans. And yeah, Tori, I agree with you. Anticipation amongst the media as well, because it's been conjecture for 3 months now. We've just been kind of postulating for 3 months now. Now we get to dig in a little bit more. And like you said, maybe not something that we report back on Thursday for the football party, or remix is going to be the squad show. But we may not have all of it to report back, or even next Monday. But as our shows start to build throughout the rest of the summer, then we'll really be able to give you a feel of what this team is developing into. So Jarvis, our guy D, Orlando Ledbetter of the AJC, who of course stopped by Thursday's football party, listed 5 storylines coming into camp this year. I want to just shout those out for D-Led and kind of for our audience in case they missed it. Number 1, Penix takes over. Number 2, defensive overhaul. Number 3, pass rush is a focal point. Number 4, unlocking Kyle Pitts. And number 5 of his top 5 storylines going into camp, offensive line must remain strong. So let me start here by asking, which one of these is the top storyline for you? Or is there another storyline that he didn't hit on that's your number 1 heading into camp?
I think it has to be Michael Penix for me, because I think about, what I feel like he's going to be as a player, but I can't really verified that until he actually goes out there and do it, right? Like I can look at those 3 games that he played in last year, like, oh, I saw some really good things. He made some really good throws. He came up clutch in some clutch moments when he could have easily folded and would have probably been given a pass because he was a rookie quarterback making his first few starts in the NFL, and that kind of happens. It's not out of the norm for rookie quarterbacks to struggle in those type of moments. So I feel like based off of what I've seen, I understand, him taking over and him coming into the second year in his offense with Zach Robinson. We talked about on the previous football party how I want to see where Zach is going to have that level of comfort with calling certain plays in certain moments and when he's going to get that necessary confidence, because we know that MPX has the confidence. He like, hey man, call the play. I want, I'm ready to roll. So and I'm from a play calling standpoint, I feel like it's going to be a moment. It's going to be a time and place where he's like, okay, let me go ahead and try this out. And I think that whenever that we reach that moment, I feel like we'll really understand what Michael Penix is probably going to be. And we have a really good understanding of like who he's going to be for this team in 2025.
Yeah, for me, I think Penix taking over for me is the big storyline and overarching storyline for the season. But just me personally, like in training camp, when watching quarterbacks often throw against air, it's like, like I want to see how he handles an actual NFL defense that's actually game planning against him, not sort of the vanilla things that the Falcons defense is going to run in training camp. So for me, what Penix does this training camp, obviously be paying attention to, but it's not, for me at least, the most intriguing storyline. For me, it's got to be the defensive overhaul with what Jeff Ulbrich is going to bring schematically that's different from what the Falcons did last year. What are some of the things that Raheem Morris retains from what they did last year and what he's done in the past, and how those things marry together. And then again, going back to what we're talking about, where the Falcons are really betting on a bunch of unproven rookies, as Tori put it, a bunch of guys from the last 2 draft classes that haven't really proven themselves, but are going to need to prove themselves if the defense is going to take significant steps this upcoming season. So for me, at least as far as training camp goes over the next 6 weeks, that to me is kind of, for me, the big storyline. But obviously once we get to September, like all we're going to talk about is Michael Penix and like, we got to get our practice reps in as media members as well between now and then to talk about Michael Penix before we get to the season. So it is important, but not maybe the most important thing for me.
Yeah, we need reps too, right, Free?
Oh man. Well, I say, like, for me, I go into every training camp, like, number one priority is usually like looking at the guys who we didn't see last year or who are injured, who are coming back. So like I have a lot of what I think I'm going to be doing early on is seeing kind of where DeMarco Helms, Braylon Trice, Young Waku, like where some of these players are slotting in, or how, like what they're talking about in terms of their own recovery and what it's going to look like. But I think honestly, my biggest storyline in training camp is how many of these players are we actually going to see in the preseason? Like, how many questions can be answered through training camp to the point of where you don't need to see people in the preseason? Because I actually think looking ahead at this preseason in comparison to last year, you're gonna need to play more guys.
Oh, no
and here's the thing is, like, I'm not really a big proponent of like, hey, yeah, play starters in the preseason. I'm actually the opposite. I'm like a big, like, I don't really care to see starters in the preseason. Like, these are football players. Like, they know the game. They know what's up. But considering the level of overhaul of which, like, Free and Jarvis have both been talking about, Jarvis with Michael Penix and, the offense, and Free with, like, these young starters for the defense, I actually do think that you're going to need to see some live reps, considering, Tanitra, what you were talking about, with the gauntlet of the first 5 weeks of this season and what it's going to be. Like, you can't afford, if you're the Falcons, you can't afford to start slow. And I think the only way to make sure that doesn't happen is to get reps in the preseason. So it's a perfect storm where I'm basically like changing everything I thought I knew about playing starters in the preseason because of where things stand right now. So
Yeah.
that to me is like, that's the biggest storyline is, training camp is what it is, and we'll see a lot of one-on-ones, and we'll see a lot of matchups, and we'll see some rotations here and there, but who plays in the preseason? That's number one.
Yeah, and Tori, I got to tell you, that's probably, and maybe as we say in broadcast and journalism, maybe I did kind of bury the lead there because it was probably 1B. Michael Penix Jr. was definitely 1A in the conversations this past weekend with fans, just kind of them talking to me and me kind of asking. But yeah, that preseason conversation eventually took over. Like, people really feel passionately that they need to see, because yes, you are dealing with essentially a double rookie class. And without being able to see them with what you're about to face, even in week 1 against Tampa Bay, I mean, that game has so many implications. It's not just coming out of the gate and doing better than you did last year in your season opener, your season home opener. That is a divisional matchup against a team that keeps snatching the division from you, it seems like, every time you're on the cusp. So I think you have to make a statement. But in order to be able to make that statement on September 7th, you've got to put things in place in the meantime to be ready to rock and roll. Now, like I said earlier, Locked On is just different. Down to the way we roll out our top 100. We'll take that under further review. This episode of our Atlanta football party is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app is actually cool because it keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out. It makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. So if you're new to FanDuel, here's the deal. You can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Whether you're placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride into the 9th inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you're part of the action. So open that FanDuel app today and visit FanDuel.com to get started. So Locked On's NFL hosts voted on the best players of the 2025 NFL season. Host Peter Bukowski said the hosts have been voting for weeks for the players who've earned spots on the list. I put that in quotes because I'll come back to that earned part. The Eagles have the most top 100 players with 7. Falcons clocked in with 4. But before we get reactions to the Falcons on or not on the list, Tori, what do you think about choosing to roll out 1 to 100 versus, say, 100 to 1?
I think it makes sense. Because I don't know, the only time that I feel like you go from 1 down is the draft, which again makes sense. But I know everything else, you're trying to see who the number 1 player is. I was very interested to see who ultimately landed into the top 10. Yeah. And I think you have to build up to that because no one's going to care about 90 through 100. I don't think, if they already know who 1 through 10 is.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. Free, I'll give you an opportunity because I know that you were part of that voting piece. I know that this has been weeks and weeks of debate on top of debate on top of debate. When you heard that we were going to go as Locked On from 1 to 100 versus 100 to 1, what did you think?
I was like, hey, ain't nobody got time for us to slow play this whole thing, and do what the NFL does when they do their top 100. We'll release 5 or 10 guys every week and whatnot. No, man, get us all 100 guys, drop them all at once. I want to know who's number 1. That's really where all the intrigue and debate is. Again, we'll talk about guys that are in the 90s when we talk about the Falcons later. But at the end of the day, it's we don't care about 100. We care about 1. So let's get that out of the way.
Right. So Jarvis, I guess I was kind of thinking, okay, 1 to 100, 100 to 1. I'm so accustomed to 100 to 1. The only thing I thought about when I saw 1 to 100 was, okay, that means I just have to watch this show the entire hour. And I'm not trying to be funny, guys, but I have to watch the show the entire hour because I know the Falcons ain't going to have nobody in 1 through 10. So I was going to stay tapped in because I knew I had to watch the show to see where our players here in our local market we're going to land. But what do you think about just remixing it a little bit there?
Just go ahead and just let it all out. That's kind of how I live my life. You know what I mean? Just let it all hang out, baby. So I appreciate it, especially, with Lamar Jackson being 1 and Patrick Mahomes being 2. That's a whole conversation that people, all up in the fields about. I was like, okay, Lamar coming through.
Yeah,
all right.
That part.
So yeah, but I think it's good because especially when you have a top 10 like that, and when you go through the rest of them, of course, you're gonna see where the Falcons are, and like whatever fan of team, whatever fan who's a fan of whatever their particular team is, they're gonna go through the whole list because they want to see who is out there. So it's like, all right, let's go and lay it all out, and everybody respond, and I think that's a kind of good way to live your life, man. Just let it all hang, baby.
Well, Tori Jarvis kind of hinted at it, so we're going to go right in because, that top 10 sent me. The top 10, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Myles Garrett, Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Micah Parsons, Patrick Surtain II, and Saquon Barkley rounded it out. So did the panelists get it right with that order of the players in terms of who's at the top of the food chain? If not, what did you think about that order? Did you want to see somebody else in the top 10? I mean, like I said, it sent me.
So I go like back and forth a little bit sometimes with these rankings because I think it's really, really difficult to like usurp quarterbacks.
It is.
And I think like that's why I always have such an issue with like these rankings is because the quarterback position in and of itself is the most important position in all of sports, in my opinion, just by the nature of what the mechanisms of responsibility for that position are. And so the Lamar, the Patrick Mahomes, the Josh Allens, like that all to me, I think like makes sense. It's one of those things that and I think you obviously can't put like Jamar Chase above Joe Burrow because there is no Jamar Chase without Joe Burrow. But I don't know. I have a hard time with rankings. I almost hate like having quarterbacks a part of rankings.
Yeah.
Because they're
a different breed.
They skew it so much. So I honestly wish that we could just like make a collective statement to like not put quarterbacks in these rankings and have them be their own ranking. Because I think it's interesting to me. I was actually this may be a hot take, but I was actually really surprised by Justin Jefferson being so high.
Yeah. No, but I can understand, Tori, because it goes back to, if you look at the list, then the list would indicate that the premium is on quarterbacks and wide receivers because you got Justin Jefferson followed by Jamar Chase. So I hear what you're saying. It's almost like, well, what are we putting a premium on? And obviously our panelists put a premium on the QB position and the guy that QB is throwing to. But it was an interesting top 10 for me because I found myself looking, and I'll get into that other part in a second because I want Jarvis and Free to weigh in as well. But I found myself kind of looking to see where the other quarterbacks landed, like who was kind of next in line, obviously, because my issues with Jalen Hurts at 46. But I'm going to just hold my mule. Jarvis, you go ahead and chime in and let me know what your thoughts were on that top 10, whether you wanted to remix it, you were surprised that someone was in it, or maybe someone was out of it.
I was appreciating the love and respect that people have for Myles Garrett and the talent that he is and how dominant this dude has been. Like, this dude can stop playing today and you can make a case for him getting into the Hall of Fame. Sorry.
No question.
I don't care what nobody say. It's just that's just the facts of the case. And when you think about it from that standpoint, I just love that, a defensive lineman is getting the love that he deserves because that dude can take over games and he's had to play for the Cleveland Browns. So get this man some love. Like, I appreciate that. And then, of course, the like I mentioned earlier, the whole Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes piece. Okay, I can kind of understand it, to be honest with you, because it's like, okay, has Patrick Mahomes, since he got his butt kicked, by the Philadelphia Eagles, is that one of the reasons why y'all kind of dropped him down? Is the run over? Is him being in GOAT conversations kind of over with because he's not going to win any more Super Bowls? And you think that Lamar Jackson, once he gets that Super Bowl, like he should be in that conversation with Patrick Mahomes, but I think he should be in that conversation without the Super Bowl because I try not to weigh them as much as a lot of people is because, we're in this Super Bowl era of questions and, okay, you're not talented enough if you don't win a Super Bowl. But, like, my talent didn't change, after I won the Super Bowl. I just had a better team around me and everything worked out in my favor for that particular season. So I just think that, with Lamar Jackson being in front of Patrick Mahomes, I feel like that's kind of like a future projecting more so than looking back as to what they've already accomplished. I'm like, okay, I feel like Lamar could be that guy, that next face of the league, so to speak, because he's been held down for so long, even though he's won multiple MVPs. But, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that one. And it's interesting because the list was a little bit all over the place because we are in that era of Super Bowls, if you will, and that being kind of the thing that dictates. But then you look at Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and you're like, okay, Josh Allen was the MVP for last year. So theoretically, wouldn't he be at the top of the list? Although Josh Allen was second team All NFL. Lamar Jackson was first team All of NFL and beat him in every single category, but didn't win the MVP. But like you said, that's a conversation for another day. And then Patrick Mahomes is kind of sandwiched in there. And then Jalen Hurts, who, I'm going to keep saying it all show because I was ticked off at the 46. What's it going to take for this guy to get some respect on his name when literally he outplayed? I don't care if he didn't win the Super Bowl the first time he played against Patrick Mahomes. He outplayed him both times. And he did outplay him both times. So if that's your crucible, if that's one of your criterion, if you will, and he's doing that in the most critical games, postseason games, to get his team to the Super Bowl and then to actually help them win it, especially in the last Super Bowl when Saquon Barkley was who the Chiefs decided, hey, we're going to stop you and we're going to force Hurts to win the game, beat us, and he did. I got a real problem with that 46. But then you look at it, going back to Tori's comment, and you look at the quarterbacks that are ahead of him. There was only one, Justin Herbert, who I could find that should not have been ahead of him. Most of the other players who were ahead of him were quarterbacks. That said, Free, what about that top 10 for you? Like, was it okay? Did you want to remix it? Did somebody else belong in it?
Yeah, I mean, the one player that I had in my own personal top 10 when we were sort of submitting these to be sort of, collected and collated into a comprehensive rankings was Tristan Wirfs, because to me, he's the best tackle in football. And so he was the guy that I had in my top 10 that didn't quite make it into the top 10. I think it was like 21 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so like that was one of the challenges of this, because it's like, how much weight do you put on this most recent season? And I think that's a big reason why Lamar Jackson is number one, because a lot of people felt like he was the best player in football last year. And how much weight do you put in the overall body of work for a player? Because you look at Patrick Mahomes and his overall body of work, he's the best quarterback in football and has been so for, 7 years at this point in time, but he's coming off arguably his worst season in the NFL. And so how much do you want to ding him for that? And it's one of those challenges. And you look at a player like Jalen Hurts. Like Jalen Hurts has absolutely killed it in 2 Januaries over the last 3 years. But it's like, the argument you just presented would be the same argument where you would say, well, Eli Manning outplayed Tom Brady in 2 Super Bowls. Is Eli Manning better than Tom Brady? And probably most people would say no. And I think that's the similar sort of argument that holds back a guy like Jalen Hurts, who he's kind of whether you think this is a fair or unfair comparison, but he's kind of like the modern day Eli Manning, where he's been really lights out in January. But then when you look at his like regular season body of work, he's good. I don't think anybody would deny that he's one of the 10 best quarterbacks and why he was ranked high, but like you wouldn't put him in the same sort of tier as the Lamars and the Mahomeses and the Josh Allens and Joe Burrows based off of their regular season body of work. And so those are just some of the things that are really challenging when you're doing this, because every different person has different criteria. How much weight do you put on last year? How much weight do you put on the future? How much weight do you put on the entire body of work? Like, I had Travis Kelce in my top 50, but Travis Kelce wasn't anywhere close to being the player that we've known him to be for the better part of a decade last year. But I'm like, I still got to give Travis Kelce some love because he's Travis Kelce, and based off of what he can do, you still have to go into those games when you play the Kansas City Chiefs, and you're like, we got to keep an eye on. We can't let Travis Kelce beat us, and so those are all those challenges that come with doing these rankings. And then when you have like 40 some odd hosts that all have different criteria and whatnot, and so that's where you hope that it all comes together and you can sort of see a cohesive breakdown. So when I look at the top 10, I'm like, yeah, I think we collectively mostly got it right for Locked On with that top 10. We can nitpick it here and there. It's, later in the rankings where it's like, I don't know if we got all those rankings a little bit later on, but we'll save that for later.
Yeah, because the one that was a head scratcher because it kind of mixes things up and kind of muddies the waters was Travis Hunter at 67, because I'm like, he's not taking an NFL snap. I don't want anybody in a list that hasn't taken an NFL snap, but I know what the rationale was. It was kind of the projection of, if you will. So it was kind of like a hodgepodge of 24 and 25. And okay, Aaron, I just got to be petty one more time before I go to break. Eli Manning was never in the top 10 of any statistical categories during the regular season, never ever sniffed the finalist space of being an NFL MVP for the regular season. Jalen Hurts, however, was the runner-up for NFL MVP for the regular season in 2022 and also has finished in the top 10 of several categories since he started his career in the league. Just saying, I don't want any comparisons to my guy Jalen Hurts and Eli Manning that are not fair, man. Fair
Got
is
ripped a
fair.
new one there, Mr. Freeman. Just saying.
I apologize. I didn't realize what I was saying when I said
Okay,
that.
I'm ripping everybody a new one all the way for Jalen Hurts. That's just me, man. That's just my thing. And I know I'm not an Eagles fan. Everybody knows I am a diehard Steelers fan, but man, I just don't know. That guy just can't get credit for anything that I feel like he should be getting more credit than he deserves. But anyway, Free, it's gonna be all you eventually, because we are going to talk about your Mount Rushmore Falcons, but we still got some Falcons to get into who actually made this top 100 for Locked On. We'll discuss that when we run it back. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by BetterHelp. Workplace stress is at an all-time high. 61% of the global workforce is reporting higher than normal stress levels. This summer is the perfect time to take small steps to focus on your wellness and manage the challenges that come with your workday. Of course, most of us can't quit our jobs or take endless vacations, nor does anyone on this football party want to. But you can start small if you have work-related stress, whether it's going outside for a few minutes, adding movement into your day, or talking to someone who can help you navigate life's challenges. That's where BetterHelp comes in. Do you have any boundaries you've been wanting to set? Well, therapy can help you set healthier boundaries at work so stress doesn't spill over into the rest of your life. And how busy is your schedule? I mean, do you ever wish you had more time to schedule appointments? The flexibility of online therapy makes it easy to fit sessions into a busy schedule, no matter where you are. So as the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Unwind from work with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Okay, so we obviously had a little bit of a spirited debate. Thank you, Free, for letting me just release about the top 10. But let's talk about what we really came here to talk about, which is the Falcons who made the list. As we mentioned, 4 of them did: Bijan Robinson, Chris Lindstrom, Drake London, and Jesse Bates. So Bijan Robinson was actually the first Falcon to crack the list, landing at number 34. For you, Tori, too high, too low, just right based on the 33 players who came before him?
Yeah, I think that's pretty on par for probably where he is, especially like knowing that Saquon was so high. Like,
Yes.
So the valuation of the running back position, if you think that Bijan Robinson is in the top, like it is a top 3 running back right now, which I definitely think he is, then I do think you have to put him in the top 40. And so I do like I like that positioning for Bijan Robinson. I think it makes sense. And I also think that like if the Falcons are playing better, he's higher.
Yeah, I would agree. But I think you make an excellent point when we kind of look at that list and we talk about some of the mile markers, if you will, that Bijan Robinson is even looking at, like a Saquon Barkley and of course a Christian McCaffrey that we've heard him mention. You kind of look and you say, okay, if Saquon crack the top 10, and even Derrick Henry coming in at number 14. And then you look through the list and you're like, okay, there's not another running back until Bijan Robinson. That's a pretty fair list, I would say, Jarvis.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. Because when you think about, like Tori mentioned, always makes a great point. Like, reason why most of these guys, because they haven't been winning games. Like, they don't play in the playoffs, and they didn't have these great games. And, in the playoffs and the postseason when all the eyeballs are on that particular team. So I just look at it from the standpoint of, okay, if he's behind Saquon and Derrick Henry, no matter where he falls, if he's the third best running back, and it's kind of what the numbers failed last year, because we talked about this. Bijan had a really good year last year, but nobody was talking about it because Saquon Barkley was outerworldly, and Derrick Henry was outerworldly. All of those guys were aliens last year, and we're not used to seeing guys at that age, have those type of seasons, especially with the wear and tear what Derrick Henry has had, throughout his entire career. He used to get 100 carries a game when he was in high school. So, when you have a guy putting on those type of performance, you tend to forget like the guys who were directly behind him. But it worked out on this particular list that, hey, he was the third, highest ranked running back. It's just 34, because when you look at what the other guys are ranked, so I appreciate them. It ended up like that. I thought it was a solid deal in that way.
Yeah, same. What would you say, Aaron, to Bijan being ranked 34th on the list of the top 100?
Yeah, I think it was reasonably fair. I think I had Bijan personally on my 25 on my own personal top 100. So, it's a little lower than where I sort of valued him. But I think overall, when you look at, as Jarvis said, the types of seasons that guys like Saquon and Derrick Henry had last year, and them being both in the top 15, as he said, like them having those alien type of years, like there is going to be some more significant separation between those guys and Bijan and guys like Jahmyr Gibbs and some of the other guys that are sort of in that next tier of running backs. But I do think, Bijan could definitely change the narrative this upcoming season with the type of season that I think a lot of us are projecting him to sort of have and make a big leap up next year's top 100 rankings, where he could be in the top 20 and potentially be the top running back off the board. So I think this ranking is relatively fair. I would have had him a little bit higher on my personal rankings, but it's mostly on the nose.
Great call, Free, about Bijan Robinson. If he's having a year that's anywhere close to what Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry did last year, we are having a different conversation about this Falcons team overall. Now, Chris Lindstrom followed Bijan as the next Falcon on the list, debuting at 52. Tori, too high, too low, just right?
I'm just glad Chris Lindstrom is made the list. I think that he was
he's in his era, Tori.
I know. I feel like he was snubbed with the NFL list. So I think the fact that I feel like the fact that, he's a top, almost a top 50 player in this league, as I would argue one of the best, if not the best offensive guards in the game right now. I just love it when some offensive linemen get some love. I know they're not going to be kind of for a vast majority of fans, and I feel like even media members, offensive linemen aren't really cracking a lot of high numbers for a lot of these lists. But I'm just happy that Chris Lindstrom is a part of it, and I think 52 is a fair spot for considering the position. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think that's a great call, Tori. They're like the unsung heroes. I always say I love them because they are the true cerebrals who really kind of are the engine behind everything that runs. But because they're behind the scenes and they're the engines that make it run, you don't really hear a whole heck of a lot about them. So you might hear about a Chris Jones, who is the first offensive lineman on the board, followed by Penei Sewell at 12 and 13 respectively. But yeah, and then Lane Dickerson made that list as well, or made that next group of 11 to 20, Jarvis. But ultimately speaking, they see Chris Lindstrom crack that top 50 as an offensive lineman, like we said, on a team that underperformed last year. If we're including that as a metric, it's pretty good. Good.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I look at it kind of like the same way I view the running back position with Bijan Robinson. Like, he's the second highest interior offensive lineman on the list, right behind Creed Humphrey. No argument there. So when you think about it from that aspect, I feel like he's rightfully in place. And normally, like Tori mentioned, we wouldn't see a Falcons offensive lineman on there because a lot of people were kind of looking at the rankings as far as passing and rushing, and saw that the Falcons were in the top 10 in both categories. They're like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay. Because it's just so hard to quantify that position. It almost you have to kind of look at the position and saying, okay, maybe like eye test and really dig into the tape to kind of rank offensive linemen. It's kind of boring, to be honest with you, especially with guys who all into the numbers from the analytic part of it. So for me, I feel like he's right there where he needs to be. And he's just going to be one of those quiet guys that's just going to continue to rise up the ranks. The more they start winning games, people are going to know his name once they start getting into the postseason, like I mentioned with Bijan Robinson.
Yeah. And what about you, Free? When you see where Chris Lindstrom landed on the top 100, what are your thoughts about him relative to, as Jarvis mentioned, Humphreys, relative to where other O-linemen landed ahead of him?
Well, I think this ranking is egregiously terrible because I had Chris Lindstrom at 51 on my personal rankings and to find him at 52. I'm disgusted with the rest of the hosts at the Locked On. No, I'm kidding. This is pretty much on the nose, spot on. And so like I feel like, I know when I was going through my rankings, when I think Jarvis was touching on this and Tori to a lesser extent, like it's hard to kind of value offensive linemen, but like when you're really good at that job, it's like I kind of give those guys a little bit more of a bump than maybe other people would, just because of the degree of difficulty that these guys often are stuck on, particularly offensive tackles, where it's like you're on an island against, one of the best athletes in football. And like, if you mess up one time, like people are gonna be like, you're terrible. And it's like, you have to be kind of perfect. And when you can get close to perfection, as many of these guys do, like that deserves credit. And then when you're talking about the interior offensive line, those guys typically are not necessarily put on those islands in the same way. But when you're a guy like Chris Lindstrom, and the thing I've said many, many times over the years on Locked On Falcons, like this man is arguably the best zone blocking guard in football. And maybe the best zone blocking offensive lineman in football. And a big reason why the Falcons run game is geared the way it is because they have this exceptional player at that. And it's like, okay, how do I value that? And so for me, that is one of the 51 best players in the NFL. And obviously a lot of the other hosts agreed with me on that assessment.
Fair. And what about Tori? Drake London cracked the list next at 88. Too high? Well, I wouldn't say too high by any stretch of the imagination, by the way. I would say maybe too low or just right.
I think it's a little too low. I wish he was breaking more into that like 75 range. I think that his production warrants that. Yeah. I think what's interesting is it goes back to kind of everything that we're saying is like individual performance is weighted differently with teams that win and teams that you see more of and teams that are in the national spotlight more in a good way. And I think like that is where a player like Drake London is kind of undervalued from the scope of, I think, nationally. I think people really like to watch him play and they think he's really good, but I don't think that they often realize how good his numbers have been because of everything happening at the quarterback position. So I think I do kind of, when Michael Penix says, like Drake London could essentially put the league on notice in this year, like just hold on, just wait a minute, like he's coming. I think that like I tend to believe that because we are sitting here watching Drake London day after day after day, game after game, the physical feats of like the 50-50 ball catches that he makes. And I think just his overall ability to get open, like those make him a top 75 player for me. But I understand from a national perspective, people are only seeing maybe like one or two catches of Drake London, and it's in the context of like, oh, Desmond Ridder or Marcus Mariota or Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix is throwing to him. It's never Drake London being the guy. Yeah. And I think like that's why he ends up kind of in that back quartile of even if his numbers and his metrics and what he is as a player differs. It's interesting because I also think like with all of these contract extensions that are coming down the pike and all this stuff, like I'm really curious to see what type of contract Drake London ultimately garners once he gets to the end of that 5th-year option, if he even gets that far.
Yeah. And Jarvis, Tori is so right as far as the success piece, because when you look at most of the teams in the NFL on this top 100 have 4 players on the list. So that's kind of like middling as far as getting 4 players on the list. When you start looking at players who are not just, or teams who not just have players at the top of the list, but also have the highest number, Eagles, of course, Lions, of course, 49ers, a little bit off, but they do have some high performing players at certain positions, so you can understand that. But then it goes into exactly where you think it would go with the Chiefs, and then you get into the teams that had 5 players on the list. So yeah, a lot of it boils down to success. But for you, Drake London, too low or just right?
I think it's just right, because, and not from a talent perspective, just from finally having a stable quarterback. I feel like he's going to have a stable quarterback for the next 6 or 7 years, hopefully 10 years, the next decade, right? So if you have a quarterback in that conversation of nice, up and coming, young and all that stuff, I think like the wide receiver, whoever his main guy is or wide receiver 1 is, he's automatically thrown into those conversations about, oh man, he's one of the better wide receivers in the league, and I think that, just the style of play and where he is now and the production he's had with that inconsistency at quarterback. Yeah, I think I'm with Mike. Like, he's about to get ready to pop because he knows what he's capable of as a player, as a quarterback, and he also sees what he was able to accomplish with no work, no offseason work, in those 3 games last year. So, and like I said, and they fell right into that. I go back to my number, 27, 28 points a game. That was easy work when he played for those 3 games. So yeah, I think it's just right. And I think it's going to be much higher next year.
Yeah. Free 88 good, 88 too low.
It's a little low. I had Drake London at 74, and wide receivers is an interesting position because I think there's like 3 or 4 guys at the top. It's kind of similar to quarterback where there's like 3 or 4 guys at the top, and then like 5 through like 20, you could rank them however you want. You can just kind of stick them in a hat, and it's just like what your preference is in terms of how you value those guys. And I think I had like 17 in my top 100. I think the ultimate list, if you count Travis Hunter as a wide receiver, they were like 17, but like my 17 only, there's like 13 of them overlapped with the 17 in the sort of final rankings and whatnot. And for me, Drake London was a little bit lower than I sort of expected. But as others have said, I do feel like he's going to climb up these rankings this upcoming season, similar to the conversation we're having with Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, Tori, I think we could say the same for Jesse Bates climbing the list because he rounded out the Falcons list, making it at 96.
Yeah, it's another situation where it's like he's a top 1-2 safety in the league, but because like the Falcons are not winning games and because there are some other like defensive backs that I think are on teams that are winning and are making those big highlights and those big plays and the biggest moments, like that's why they're valued so high. But you can't tell me that Jesse Bates is not higher and should not be higher. Like as a player, as an individual, as a production machine, as someone who impacts the game, like at that position, like there are few, if there are any, that I would put above Jesse Bates. I think he is arguably the best safety in the league. In the same conversation that we're talking about Chris Lindstrom being the best guard in the league, I think you have to have that same conversation about Jesse Bates. And because of that, I want to push him much, much higher. But I understand. That's the thing is like coming at this, I am so close to the Falcons that like I feel like I don't see things from a league-wide perspective like as clearly as I think other people from a league-wide perspective do, and how they have to weigh different situations. It's all subjective. It's all like a player could be a mediocre player on a winning team and get a higher bid than a player who's a really good player on a mediocre team. So like, I think that's where all of this kind of levels out for me, but I think Jesse Bates deserves to be higher.
I think Tori just made my point. For example, Kirby Joseph is not better than Jesse Bates. I'm sorry. I don't care if the Lions been in the playoffs and all that stuff and everything. I don't want to hear about Kirby Joseph being better than Jesse Bates III. Yeah. I'm sorry. That is absolutely ridiculous. And I would just leave it at that because I don't want to get personal with anybody because I don't want nobody trying to come at me on social media about, talking about their play and all that stuff. I'm like, all right, man.
That's the fun part, though.
Right. I'm not trying to go into the Aaron Freeman category because he's a special individual. He had players come at him before on social. So, I don't want to go into that category. I'm trying to stay away from that. 2025, I'm trying to be alive, baby. You know what I'm saying? I don't want no drama.
Free with the smoke.
No smoke over here, baby.
Yeah, I think Jesse Bates is probably of these rankings, the one that I would disagree with the most. I had Jesse Bates at 43, he's 96. Kirby Joseph gets love because he had 9 interceptions last year and he plays for the Lions, right? And people will just basically say that's the argument then and there, that production and whatnot. Same with Xavier McKinney as well. And I think part of it is just like I think it's clear that like we don't value safeties enough when you look at these rankings. It's basically like Kyle Hamilton's the only safety that's really ranked pretty high. I think it was like 26 or something like that. And then after that point, like then they're just seeing like whether it's Antoine Winfield or Jesse Bates or Derwin James, McKinney, Budda Baker, all these guys that were able to kind of get into the latter half of these rankings. But you can argue all of these guys are probably, in Jesse Bates' case, like he's 50 spots too low, but a lot of these guys maybe, 30, 40 spots too low in these rankings. So I just think that's just kind of the nature of the position. And as others have said, all these other guys are playing on playoff teams, getting a lot more, significance and eyeballs on them in January. And unfortunately, he hasn't been able to do that.
Well, Free like smoke. That's why we're going to talk about his own personal Mount Rushmore of Falcons when we run it back. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them, but if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast. On average, in 15 minutes. Effects can even last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. So head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. You can even read real customer reviews on their website. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. So that's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off when you head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. All right, Aaron. So another one of those lists was Locked On's Mount Rushmore. Now, Locked On actually did a Mount Rushmore for each franchise in the NFL. And of course, our own Aaron Freeman, who also, of course, serves as host for Locked On Falcons, put Matt Ryan, Michael Vick, Julio Jones, and Deion Sanders atop his Mount Rushmore. So let the debate begin, starting with Free, letting us know why these were your top 4.
Well, it's funny because we did these a while ago and I completely forgot about it. So when it was like, oh, we're publishing, I'm like, I don't even remember who I picked. And then I saw it and I was like, oh yeah, okay. Now I have to defend myself in all these comments that I'm about to get when it's just like, I haven't even thought about this in like weeks at this point. But For me, I kind of went with the idea of like iconic Atlanta Falcons players, right? Just because I don't think the Falcons may have the successful history that we all want them to have. So you don't necessarily look back at a lot of those eras where they had good players with the sort of like, oh, this is an icon of Atlanta Falcons football and whatnot. And so for me, when you look at the most successful era, Matt Ryan and Julio Jones sort of stand out for that team. And certainly I think are, the top two contenders for, who's had the best careers as Falcon players. And there's a lot of other players that I could have picked, Tommy Nobis, Jeff Van Note, Mike Ken, Jesse Tuggle, Jamal Anderson, Roddy White, so many other players I could have potentially picked. But for me, it was like, when most people think about the Atlanta Falcons, particularly, most people that are Falcon fans today, a lot of them became Falcon fans because of one player, that's Michael Vick. I think a lot of people nationally think of him iconically as an Atlanta Falcon. And, even if you look at his career as not necessarily living up to the hype or whatever. And Deion Jones, I think, was a similar player that just kind of embodies the swagger of the city of Atlanta to me. And he was a big part of my fandom early on in the early 90s. And so my thought process was just like, look, Mount Rushmore, is a national monument here in America. And it's like, it's an iconic symbol when you think about like, oh, who are the iconic presidents? Like, these are the presidents that you think of that you can immediately recognize their face. And that kind of led me to looking for more players that were iconic Atlanta Falcons necessarily than guys that just had the best careers in Atlanta.
I think it's interesting too, because like, to your point, it's who are the Falcons that the average person can name? Like, and I think the four that you chose are the four that I think the average person, whether they like football, whether they don't like football, whether they're around the game, whether they're not, like, these are four individuals, especially Deion Jones, especially Michael Vick, that permeated culture. And I think like that is what, even though perhaps, especially when we talk about Michael Vick, like the wins weren't there. Like when he was a Falcon, it wasn't like these teams outside of those first couple of years, like, were astronomically winning games, making Super Bowl runs, all that kind of stuff over multiple years. Like, that's not the teams that he had, but that doesn't take away like for the impact that Michael Vick had on the game. And so I think like you can't overlook, even if like the wins weren't there. Like, I think to your point of like, if you're standing there and you're talking to somebody who doesn't know lickety split about the Falcons, they can tell you about Michael Vick. They can probably tell you about Deion Jones. They could probably tell you about Julio and Matt. But like that to me is like why I understand the four you chose. I would have a hard time choosing four others. Like, even though I feel like I could make an argument for Roddy White, I can make an argument for Claude Humphrey. Like I could make an argument for a lot of these guys, but I think just like name recognition, you can't beat those four.
Yeah, I would agree. And of course we know that it's one of those things where your mind just kind of follows what you hear. So, of course, we know we meant Deion Sanders and not Deion Jones. Good people, Deion Sanders is the standard. There's no way Jarvis Davis is going to let us get out of a show talking about a Mount Rushmore without himself talking about Deion Sanders.
Absolutely. Prime is prime. Like, there's no need for an explanation of who he is. And I know that, he did not re-sign with the Falcons and, probably will be number one on this list for me. But I think basically off of what I'm about to say, because I feel like Michael Vick is the only superstar that this Falcons team has ever had, right? Because when you look at being on the cover of Madden, having his own shoes, like his third rendition was about to get ready to come out, before he went on vacation for a little while. And when you think about it from that aspect, yes, Aaron, I refer to him as vacations.
I liked it. That's
you know what I'm saying? Like, the man went on vacation. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. He'll be back. But I think, and that's why I feel like I give people grace when they talk about Michael Vick and Matt Ryan and having that conversation. Right? We know that conversation that people like to have, and it's not one for me because Matt Ryan is the best quarterback that's ever played for the Falcons. That's why he's on Mount Rushmore. Period. But when you talk about culture, like Tori mentioned, you talk about atmosphere in that Georgia Dome when Michael Vick was the starting quarterback, oh my gosh, it was the most non-segregated area in the city of Atlanta on Sundays, right? Everybody was in there. You know, it doesn't matter what you look like, what your class was. Everybody was in there like, yep, Sam, let's go. Let's get us a win, baby. We might not win, but we're having a good time. You know, so I just think that, you know, him being on that list, you can't keep Michael Vick off that list. I don't care what the record was when he was a starter. So, and then Prime, he is who he is. And then Matt Ryan, he's the best quarterback that's ever played for this, that's put on the Falcons uniform. And then when you have a guy like Julio Jones, he's a freak. So you can't keep the freaks off the list, you know, because he was just absolutely ridiculous. And he made the best catch that no one ever will talk about in the Super Bowl, you know. And so, yeah, he has to be on this list for sure.
Yeah, and I think Aaron kind of set the stage for us with saying it's the iconic players, right? Sure. Tori set the stage with it's the average Joe and what the average Joe thinks of. And Jarvis, you kind of set the stage with saying, hey, there was something on and off the field that Michael Vick did for this franchise that to this day still has not been done again. As good as Matt Ryan was, that's just Michael Vick is just in a different category, but that is why we put Matt Ryan on the Mount Rushmore, if you will. And like you guys said, and I mentioned it with Claude Humphrey, and Tori, you co-signed as well on Claude Humphrey. He's the first Falcon to get into the Hall. So obviously he's a guy from that perspective that you could make the argument. Or Morten Andersen. I still think more people identify Morten Andersen as a Falcon versus identifying him as a Saint, to be honest with you. So there are definitely some players that could be honorable mentions, if you will. You've mentioned Roddy White. Definitely could be an honorable mention. And how many times has this show talked about John Abraham being the last time the Falcons had a real pass rush? So you could have the conversation, but if we're being honest, I think Free got it right. I think you can't argue with that as your 4 Mount Rushmores for the Falcons, because they kind of set the standard in so many different ways on and off the field for what this franchise is and what this franchise is known for. And hopefully somewhere between the class of 2024 and 2025, maybe 10 or 12 years from now, we'll be having a different conversation, because there will be some players that have made their stamps on this franchise to become members of Mount Rushmore. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta football party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked on Falcons with Aaron and his frequent guest analyst Jarvis as your second listen, and check out some of Tori's work at AtlantaFalcons.com. We will see you next time.